Ek is hier so.
Goeiemôre.
Hallo, gaan dit?
Alles baie goed, dankie. Ek dink ons is reg om te begin as ek my nie misgis nie.
Ja, ons is almal hier so. Hier by Tilly Swart se kantoor, so ons is reg hier so.
Daar's hy. Baie welkom.
Dankie, hoor, ek gaan hom net gou mute.
Okay.
Ons sit hier so by my, ek wil nou mute en ek gaan hom daar mute.
Okay. Good morning and welcome to this webinar. Thank you to JJR for offering this, and we hope to have interesting discussion today on the responsibility of a property practitioner. This has been coming a long time. The Property Practitioners Act, basically, that will make a difference in future on how property practitioners deal with clients. And so we're just going to have a quick look at some of the responsibilities, and we'll ask Wimpy as well to contribute at some stage. Just a bit of background on myself, Aubrey Snyman. I'm the CEO of Multiprof Property Intelligence. We do a variety of professional services that we render to the property practitioners. I'm a town planner by trade, and our company provides services. Let me just see now. Oh, there we go. We are. Okay. We provide a variety of services to the industry. I'm a town planner. We do all town planning applications, from second dwelling applications to township applications. And then we do a lot of as-built plans, especially for the property industry. We architects, but then also lately we also do property inspections. We do environmental work, and we do valuations. So we try to connect the dots between all the professionals in the industry, and therefore we deal with lots of clients, people that made use of estate agents. We deal a lot in complexes. So we get quite a bit of feedback on what clients expect from the property practitioner, and unfortunately also the cases where the service was not to the satisfaction of the buyer, and therefore a lot of negative things happen, and it gives a negative name to estate agents. And then the purpose of the Property Practitioners Act is basically to make it a profession. Previously, it was a profession that consisted more of selling, and now it is becoming a profession that have to do with rendering services and knowledge to buyers and sellers. And there's a big difference between the two. Introducing a buyer and a seller to each other, doing some paperwork, but not having knowledge about the product is typically more what one would associate with a salesperson. But being a practitioner or a professional entails much, much more. And therefore, I think we at crossroads now in the industry, where an individual will have to decide if you want to become a professional or become more professional, scale up, get knowledge, and really become an expert in the field of property in general. And that is a tall order. I have a lot of sympathy with estate agents that need to do the upgrade. As a town planner, we typically have the same challenge because we need to know a lot about a lot of things. And exactly the same will be expected in future from property practitioners. It covers a wide variety of subjects, and you need to become an expert on most of them. And if you are not an expert, or you know you're not going to become an expert, you at least need to know who to refer to and who to talk to before you make any suggestions or claim anything about the property that you're going to do. So let's just have a look at the Property Practitioners Act as an act to improve customer protection. I can keep you busy for quite a while on the reasons why customers need more protection than in the past. So just a few points we can look at. The new Property Practitioners Act will go a long way to leveling the playing field for South African home buyers, sellers, and property practitioners. The law will ensure much more consumer protection for home buyers who are at present massively exposed to financial risk when buying existing homes foot stewards. Basically, the problem existed in the past that the seller is also paying the estate agent. So in some way, there is bias from the estate agent because of the commission paid by the seller, and the buyer have little protection if the estate agent have to choose between the two. Often the seller will be the winner because he's paying the commission. It's just human that we operate that way. Even other professionals is not really always supporting the buyer. For instance, the valuer from the bank, he looks at the risk that the bank will incur when they give a bond on this property, and therefore often they will not really look at some of the fundamentals, even things like illegal structures and things like that. They will just give a value, especially when there's the bond is only 80% or there's a big deposit. They are happy that even if all structures are not legal and some needs to be demolished eventually, they will get their money if they need to sell the property. The conveyancer, and that's where Wimpy can have an opinion as well, he's not in the position to know exactly what is happening on the property. His duty is to facilitate the transfer, and he goes according to the OTP, and he's not on site. The only person that is involved in the transaction from the beginning till the end is the property practitioner, and therefore the new act put lots more responsibility onto the property practitioner to make sure that the transaction is transparent and that there are no financial risks to the buyer. So part of what the Act encourages is to improve transparency, disclosure to potential buyers of all known defects in a property. Now, defects can be defined very widely, and we will look at certain things that we are of the opinion that if you really are interested in taking care of your buyer as well, the documentation, you should make sure that it is in order. And then for transparency, of course, you also need to have the knowledge. And we're going to have a look at that in a while. It exposes agents and sellers who are not transparent to real financial risk. And there's plenty of those that we deal with on a regular basis. It compels the agent to treat both the seller and the buyer with equal care. So even though you still get paid by the seller, you need to have the same care for your buyer. There's obviously more training required. Okay, I think that is about the most important. The Property Practitioners Act put much more effective responsibility onto property practitioners and sellers to protect the interest of home buyers. So yeah, that will form part of the responsibilities that one will have. And we thought we will just look at what is a professional really, and we thought we can just quickly have a look at some other professions, and Wimpy is also welcome to come in here. What would you, as a client, using another professional, what would you expect of another professional? Because that is what your clients will expect from you. And we're just going to have a quick look at something like a few. If you go to your doctor, what would you expect from your doctor? If you take a flight to Cape Town, what would you expect from the pilot, for instance? And if you use an architect or a town planner, there I can talk from practical experience. What do you expect from those professionals? And then, as I said, we can, Wimpy can also come in. What would a client expect from a conveyancer, for instance? Let's look at the fundamental skills shared by these professionals. Firstly, it is knowledge. A doctor will go to university, study for 7 years, and only after that he will be available to serve in the industry. And that is a bit different, and we'll get to that for the estate agents later, or the property practitioners. So the important part is that a doctor needs to know what he is talking about. He must have experience. He must use that knowledge. And the same for town planners and a pilot. I'm sure if you get onto a plane and they make an announcement that the pilot is starting today, he have never really been in this plane, but he is going to use his intuition to fly the plane, and he is going to ask people around him, and he's going to go on hearsay how to fly this plane. You will not feel very comfortable, and you will possibly not want to be on that flight. Unfortunately, it's not always with estate agents, especially rookies that don't have the experience. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't have the knowledge, but they will also not tell somebody, listen, I don't know. They will go on hearsay, and that can create lots of problems. So knowledge is a very important part, and therefore it's important to upscale that. Then obviously we all know about commitment. A professional must make a commitment. And in this case, the commitment must be to the seller, obviously, but also to the buyer. A commitment of a pilot would be he should arrive on time. He should make sure that he's not late. And the same apply obviously to all professions. In our industry, the town planning industry, if we start with a project, we need to know that we are committed to this project for sometimes 2-3 years. A township establishment can take 2 or 3 years to finalize. And we need to, from the beginning, tell the client that, listen, we're in it for the long run. And the same, I think, for architects, any of these professions that we talk about, you need to be committed to what you're doing. And then very important, integrity and ethics. And that is where a professional stands out from the crowd. It is sometimes easier to take the shortcuts, to not follow procedures, to not expose what you don't know or that you are taking a shortcut. And in being a professional, that can really come back to bite you. So if you make the decision that you want to be a property practitioner, a professional person dealing with property, integrity and ethics are not negotiable. And I think that will in future distinguish between the fly-by-nights and real property practitioners. Integrity and ethics is not negotiable, and you can often get away with unethical behavior in the short term and perhaps even make a quick buck out of it, but it always comes back. And if you want to be a role player in the industry in future, integrity and ethics is not negotiable. Competence, that is the big game changer, is where it would be expected to have lots of knowledge. The same applies, of course, as I said, to all the other professionals. If you want to be a doctor, you need to know what you're doing. If you want to fly an airplane, you need to do all the training. You need to be comfortable. You need to train on a regular basis, and you need to keep on learning. And we will look at that in a while. Then, of course, you need to be reliable. And I am always surprised when we deal with home buyers and people that have dealt with estate agents, how many times I hear somebody promised to phone me back. Or I put out this ad, I sent a mail to 5 people to contact me, and only 1 contacted me. I always wonder, if it is such a cutthroat business, why would a person that have already made contact with a potential seller or buyer, why would a person not just phone back? Why are you in the industry if you are not interested in being reliable? Again, if you look at the other industries, I think a pilot might get away with once being late for his flight. I think the second time he will definitely not have a job anymore, because you cannot rely on people. If people depends on you, you need to be reliable. So that's one of the other important things. Okay, and then of course, you must be able to hang in there. You need to be able to go the extra mile. It is a difficult industry. I don't have to tell you that. You have difficult clients. You have difficult professionals that you deal with. There's lots of knowledge and skills that you need to get hold of, and it's not always easy. But that is true of any industry, any professional. There's no easy professional job to do. A doctor continuously have to deal with patients that's not necessarily logical. There's pain, there's people that have their own ideas, there's people that is they depend on other people, and therefore we all, when you're a professional, you depend on other people, and it is not that easy. And then, of course, all of the professionals have to be accountable. So after a flight, there will be a briefing on it, and if there was a problem, somebody will be accountable for it, and they will learn from it. Unfortunately, in the past, our experience in the office is that often when things go wrong in a transaction or after a transaction, there's nobody that takes responsibility. The buck gets passed from even one professional to another, and the buyer is often the person that is on the short end of this. And then, of course, all professionals needs to be organized. You need to have the information. The pilot will definitely know about where he's flying to. He will have everything ready. He will know the times. He will know what plane it is. And the same for all the other professions. If we deal with a township establishment, or we submit building plans to council, we need to be organized in the documentation that we provide. We need to be organized in the meetings that we are involved in. And in general, having all the information together, knowing your clients, knowing what the typical questions will be, that is all part of being organized and having things together. Now let's have a look at the same skills, and perhaps just talk about the specific skills that a property practitioner will have, in the same order. And we specifically want to talk about the knowledge. It's the most important area that I think we want to discuss today. And that is from the viewpoint of the product that you deal with. Before, as I said, in being a estate agent in the past often meant that you need to find a seller and you need to find a buyer, but the knowledge about the product, and that is your property that you're selling with, was never really high on the list of important things. Being a property practitioner obviously means that you know more about the product, your property, than the seller, the buyer, or the average man on the street. Being a professional means you have information and skills that the typical man on the street don't have. That is what makes you a professional. That's what makes you a property practitioner. And therefore, knowledge, I think, is the one big difference between people that will be successful as property practitioners and people that will not be successful. The other skills was mostly the same in before. If you're a successful estate agent, you needed commitment, you needed the integrity, you needed competence, all of those things. But knowledge, I think, is the one big difference in future. And the knowledge is on a wide variety of aspects. And therefore, being a property practitioner will mean you are continuously learning, because there's always changes. There's changes in environments, there's changes in suburbs, there's changes in prices. I think the whole COVID pandemic have created new sets of rules and new values, and especially if you are in the commercial industry, where there is a huge oversupply of offices, for instance. And if you try to still use knowledge that you had 5 years ago on today's situation, you will definitely not be successful, and you will not be able to advise buyers and sellers correctly. So you will have to stay up to date on the latest. And there are so many sources of obtaining knowledge now. Of course, the first step is your NQF4 and NQF5, if that's where you're interested in. But that is only the basics, really. On a daily basis, there are new requirements, new knowledge that you need to obtain. And as I said, from our side, we specialize in the product that you sell, and therefore we understand how many different things you need to be aware of, need to know where to get the information, and it's obviously not what everybody is used to. And therefore, a new mindset is required, that when dealing with a property, you cannot start dealing with it before you have the basic knowledge of the product that you're going to deal with. There is obviously always the competition that sometimes, and that is a big problem in the industry up to now, where property practitioners that do have the knowledge and is interested in protecting their buyer would compete with estate agent that do not have the knowledge, perhaps not the integrity and the ethics either, and there is a playing field that is not level. The reality of it is that with a Property Practitioners Act and the responsibilities that will be on the property practitioner, it would be much easier and more common, and we have already started noticing that, where buyers would just not accept misleading information, and Wimpy will perhaps be also want to add on to that. The responsibility to have information is much more important, and it can cost a property practitioner that is not transparent, that is not knowledgeable, and does not give all the relevant information to buyers. It can cost them dearly, and they can be sued for losses. And again, in the past, it was good enough to ask your seller to provide you with the information. But the seller is not the professional. The seller is not the property practitioner, and often the seller is also not aware of legal requirements that should be adhered to. And sometimes he bought the property like that. Now, the idea that because somebody bought the property, you can just move it to a next owner with all illegal structures and problems, that is not acceptable when you are a property practitioner. You have the responsibility to protect your buyer, and therefore you need to do the homework and not rely on the seller to give you information, because eventually you as the professional can be held responsible for some of those issues that you should have known. Now, we quickly just want to go through the list of documents that we use and that we assist property practitioners with to supply to their sellers and buyers. That makes life much easier. It's all documentation that is required by law, and therefore a property practitioner don't have to reinvent the wheel. They must just be aware and knowledgeable about the paperwork that is existing. And if you follow these guidelines, you should have very little hassles as far as that is concerned. First is, of course, building plans. We know that building plans are, according to law, required for any structures, permanent structures as well as temporary structures, and therefore the correct time to inquire about building plans is when you list a property. Unfortunately, in the past, and we deal with it often in our office, is that only once the bank insists on the building plans, or the buyer, or there's a problem, the building plan issue will come up. And even though the seller might have indicated that he has building plans, it's no use accepting his word for it. The property practitioner needs to obtain a copy of that plan, and preferably one of the skills that I believe every property practitioner needs is to read a building plan. It's not complicated. You don't need to understand the technical details of it, but you must at least have the skill to look at the building plan, look at the property that you are dealing with, and understanding that there might be structures that was added that's not on the plan. And that is one of the basic things, and it's really not complicated. To do that, we can do training on that if that is a requirement. But if you are with a client and there's a building plan, you should have the skill to walk around the property and just have a look and advise your seller that there might be some problems on it. Important for on building plans is that you need to make sure that it is approved building plans. We often get that as well, where the seller say there's a building plan, and even if you check that there's no structures that was added, if there's no stamp on it, it is called a piece of paper. Council do not accept any plans if there's no stamp on that is legible. So make sure that it is an approved stamp. Often we also find that there is a stamp on, but the stamp says submitted. That means the plan was submitted, and often there was issues with the plan. So it was never approved, but there's a stamp on. So make sure that there's an approval stamp on it. Then, of course, as important, a certificate of occupancy. Legally, according to the national building regulations, nobody is allowed to move into a property without a certificate of occupancy. It is issued when the building is new, and so some of them is like many years old. It's kept with the building plans at council, although council have no obligation to keep copies of either building plans or certificates of occupancy. It is always the responsibility of the owner to have copies. If the owner, in this case the seller, don't have copies, it is his responsibilities, his cost to obtain them, have them redrawn, have the certificate issued, so that the buyer that you are also now responsible for get a property that conforms to all rules and regulations. Of course, important as well is make sure the plan number on the plan, because that will correlate to the plan number on the certificate of occupancy, or anything, every unit, every house you sell should have a building plan and should have a certificate of occupancy. I think it's issued since 1977. I think there is certificates of occupancy issued. And the myth is that because it's not a new house, you don't need a copy of the certificate of occupancy. That's of course not correct, because the new owner needs to know that the building, even though it was built 20 or 30 years ago, was inspected, is safe, and that all the regulations have been met. So there must be, and there should be, a certificate of occupancy, even on a house that was built many, many years ago. If you don't have the document, you are not sure what was inspected, was the house ever inspected, and some examples that we deal with on a daily basis is additions without foundations, for instance. If you walk past an addition, you have no idea if that was built on a foundation or not. We had cases where a builder just started building on top of the ground, no foundation, and obviously that is a very dangerous situation. Your buyer can move in, the next evening there's a storm, the construction collapse on his children, and somebody will be held responsible for this death. And if all the documentation have been adhered to what law prescribed when moving into a property, this would have been prevented. So yeah, then another typical thing that we have found is toilets, for instance, in additions that have not been connected to the sewer system. If you look at the toilet, you cannot say if this is connected. So it happens from time to time where people do additions and it is too expensive for them to connect it to the existing sewer system, and they will just dig a hole, put the pipe into it, put concrete over it, and there you have a toilet. So not following the requirements for building plans and occupation certificates can cause those type of things, and you'll expose your buyer to that if it's not done properly. So yeah, that's okay. In complexes, a site development plan is a requirement, and that will indicate things like carports, parking, entrances. Are those things legal? Unfortunately, in complexes with sectional title, there's huge problems with extensions of sections, with carports that's put up illegally. And again, if you would make a representation to your buyer that this is your garden, this is your carport, this is your lapa, this is your unit, and it's not legally in order, it is a misrepresentation, and it can be, they can come back to you and say, but you made a misleading statements on this. So yeah, as we said, in sectional title, it is so important to make sure, firstly, that you understand exactly what the concept of sectional title entails. I think that's the biggest issue that we have dealing in the industry is owners, property practitioners, and most people do not quite understand what sectional title is, and that creates a huge amount of trouble for trustees, for complexes. In short, when you buy in sectional title, you buy the inside of your unit, and everything else is common property outside of units. So gardens, parking areas, things like that, you cannot really sell because it does not belong to the owner, although he thought he bought it. If you don't get the documentation, and this is the typical sectional title plans, and you can establish legally what are you selling, you can very easily mislead a buyer, and eventually you can come back and say, but that's not what I signed up for. You offered me this, and now legally I only have this. So as far as sectional title is concerned, if you are not au fait with the concept, and make sure that you obtain proper training on it, and that you get the knowledge. It's really problematic, and the problems is moved from one owner to the next. And when banks now start asking for plans and sectional title plans, it just creates lots of issues. And that's a basic skill that the property practitioner should have, is understanding sectional title inside out. Other information that is available that a buyer expects from a property practitioner is to be able to give information about the future of the area where he's buying a property. The spatial development framework from council give a clear indication of what a person can expect. Will council support high-rise buildings there? Will it be low density? Will it be offices? If you want to buy in a quiet residential area, and the spatial development framework indicate high density, it is your responsibility to be able to tell a potential buyer, listen, this is not the area to buy because you are going to end up between some flats. All of this information is available, most on the internet. If you want to know more, or you don't know what it's all about, attend the training session and become knowledgeable. As we said, one of the responsibilities of a property practitioner is to be knowledgeable. Now, this potential future development is something that should be standard part of your knowledge of the area you deal with. It's easier for people that is working in an allocated area. You can get the documentation, study it, and you will know what to advise a buyer about. It's more difficult if you work all over the place. That means you must every time before you list the property, really do lots of homework to become the expert in the area. Very important stuff, for instance, municipal sewers. When there's a municipal sewer servitude, no structures is allowed on top of that. So it's often, if you just spend 5 minutes to obtain the aerial photograph with from the GIS, you can go to a property and immediately notice if there's problem structures, especially things like LAPOS is often built over sewer lines. You'll see this brown line indicates municipal sewer, and you can even on the aerial photograph see there's some structures. So you'll be able to tell your seller more than you'll be able to tell you. And so this is just a very short introduction, basically, of the type of knowledge that is available and that we believe in future will be critical to become the property practitioner, being the knowledgeable person. We often, in our office, and it's quite saddening that we often get a buyer and an estate agent in our office, and especially the younger generation is very, very clued up. They know about all the websites available, they know about the GIS systems, and where we sit and discuss a property and the buyer will tell the estate agent more about the property and important information that the estate agent don't have. And I think the challenge is to be a property practitioner is you need to be the knowledgeable person. And it is a bit of a mind shift, I think, as far as knowledge about the product is concerned. Obviously, estate agents and property practitioners are very good with lots of things. It's only this is a new area where knowledge is required, and it will be more and more the determining factor between being successful or not. Okay, I think this is what we have time for. We have a few minutes for questions. I don't know if there's any questions. You can put it in the chat. We have received a few questions. Let me just hear from Jenny here. She will just give it to me.
Okay. In a warehouse, should the new tenant taking occupation request an occupation certificate?
Yes. Okay. The question is, in a warehouse, should a tenant ask for a certificate of occupancy? My answer is definitely yes, because only if you have that certificate, you know that it is safe, you know that everything has been inspected, you know that nothing was added, especially issues like fire requirements. In a warehouse or in industrial properties, fire hazards are real, and if you don't know what this building was constructed of, what was added, it can be that even the insurance will eventually have a problem should you put in a claim because of a fire that was started by illegal material being used, or the electricity that was not complying with regulations. To get a certificate of occupancy, if one wasn't issued lately, you need something like an electrical COC. So that will force the landlord to make sure that he have an up-to-date electrical COC and that all the other requirements are met. So it's in the interest of the tenant to make sure that he have that documentation, and it should be available from the landlord.
Will the owner get a new certificate of occupancy if they update their plans of certain additions?
Yes. The certificate of occupancy that would be existing will only cover what was on the previous plan. And so any additions when a new plan is approved needs to get a new certificate of occupancy, and it will either then cover the whole property or it will add on to the existing one. But yeah, every structure, a building plan basically indicates what you plan to build. The occupation certificate indicates that what you said you were going to build and the specifications that you said you were going to build it that was approved have been adhered to.
I have a seller who wanted to build on his property for his father and had the plans drawn up and approved. Then his father passed away and never went through with it. Does he have to get the original plans received from the property and
Okay. The question is that plans was drawn up and additions was indicated that was never made. Now, technically, a building plan should always reflect what is on the property. Just on that case, perhaps that solves it. A building plan is only valid for a period of 12 months after approval if a building inspector was not called out for a first inspection. So anyhow, after 12 months, if those plans was not activated, the plans have lapsed anyhow. So it might revert back to the previous plans that was inspected. But yeah, it should be reverted back to what is on the site now. If a building inspector comes out and there is indications that there's stuff on the building plan that was not built, he will require that it's removed from the building plan so that the building plan always reflects what is on site.
How will we know if there is foundations or not? And what should we do to ensure this is in place as it's our responsibility as a realtor?
Okay. The question is about how do you know there is foundations? Very easy. The building plan will be approved, and on the building plan, it will indicate foundations, the size, the depth, whatever. Once it's built, and that's where the certificate of occupancy come in, before the inspector will issue the certificate of occupancy for the addition or whatever, he will check that the foundations have been done. And he will do it when the building is or the addition is being constructed. In cases where that was not done, to obtain an occupation certificate, you need an engineering certificate. So the engineer will have to sign off, issue a certificate stating that he takes responsibility that there is foundations. So he will go out, he will dig, he will see that the foundations, the width, the depth, whatever is according to plans, and that will form part of the documents required by the building inspector to issue the certificate of occupancy. And therefore, a building plan without the certificate of occupancy really means nothing, because it's not to say that what was indicated on the plan is what was done. In the case we discussed, possibly on the building plan, there might be the indication the foundations is indicated, but it was just never built. So on the outside, the building looks like on the plan, but it's not safe because all the requirements have not been met. Just see if there's more questions. Okay. There was also a question earlier on the POPI Act. Fortunately, unfortunately, I'm not the expert on it. I have discussed it with Wimpy, and apparently they will be planning a webinar on the POPI Act. So sorry, I can't answer that one. I know a lot, but that I don't know.
Right, I can just add we are going to have specific sessions on the POPI Act. And we had one a while ago, but we can have another one as well as on the Property Petitioners Bill that's coming to effect shortly. Okay. Yeah, it's quite important, but we'll have our next two sessions. We'll will be about that.
Okay, 100%. More questions?
You indicated that the certificate of occupancy is for new properties, but then went on saying also for properties 20 to 30 years old. What is the position? Should all properties have that, and how do one go about getting one?
Okay. The question is about existing and new buildings needing a certificate of occupancy. Perhaps I was not clear. All buildings need a certificate of occupancy. Only when you have a copy of that, you know that this property was inspected. So what I tried to explain is that once a building is erected from scratch, before the electricity can be connected, you need a certificate of occupancy. So that was issued, say, in the 90s. And that will stay valid as long as no changes are made on the property. The moment any additions are done, new building plans are approved, you need a new occupation certificate indicating those as well. So the plan number and the number on the certificate of occupancy must correspond, and only then you know if there's no extra buildings that you have a building that comply. Occupation certificates are kept with building plans at council, but I must reiterate, council have no legal obligation to keep copies of building plans or certificate of occupancy. The responsibility lies with the owner, and that's why we can't stress enough that this document should move from the seller to the buyer. It's an expensive exercise to have to obtain these by submitting new plans and getting a building inspector to get all the certificates. I mean, for you to get the certificates for a new certificate of occupancy to be issued. And therefore, it should not be negotiable to put a buyer in a situation where when he moves into the property, he don't have those documents. Because at that moment, he becomes responsible. So if council come and say, show me your plans and your certificate of occupancy, your new owner will immediately be responsible. So we emphasize, and a lot of buyers lately ask us the question as well, is it okay to buy a property without those documents? And our answer is always never, ever, ever. That is the responsibility of the owner, and make it his responsibility so that you don't take on the responsibility of things that is not legal and sometimes often have to be demolished at cost, and you don't get the product that was offered to you by the property practitioner.
And then there's another one, is there's a specific size square meterage for A, sectional title, and B, full title, to classify it as such.
Okay. The question is, are there any minimum areas for sectional title or for full title? No. Sectional title only have to do with ownership. It doesn't replace building plans. It doesn't replace town planning requirements. It only have to do with ownership. And there can be a section as small as a few square meters, or there can be a section of hundreds or thousands of square meters. Remember, in sectional title, you're buying a building, a structure. So you can't have a sectional title vacant piece of land. Then it's not sectional title, and then it becomes complicated to think that you're buying a piece of land, but there's no structures. No, there's no real limitation on how small or how big full title or sectional title can be, and it's not to be confused with any other building plans. It only has to do with ownership.
Where can we look if a property had a servitude on the property?
Okay, the question is, where do we know if there's a servitude? Well, there is documentation available. Firstly, on the title deed, there will mostly be a reference to servitude, either a servitude number, or there will be a standard clause that say no buildings allowed within 3 meters, or 2 sides of the property must be kept open for municipal services. And sometimes one of those can be relaxed. But again, if you have building plans that's approved and you have a certificate of occupancy for that, those work have been done for you, because council will not approve a building plan if there's buildings in a servitude. And if you have the occupation certificate, you know that the building inspector confirmed that there was no buildings when he was on site. But you can, on the Surveyor General diagram, you can find indication of servitudes, and that will be referred to in the title deed as well.
Last one, Audrey. What about changes made on the inside of the building where structures might be affected, especially commercial?
Okay. Very interesting, and that's one of those urban myths that when you make changes to the inside of any structure, you don't need building plans. That is not correct. Anytime you make changes that can influence the structure, or where you touch anything as far as sewage is concerned, you need approved building plans. And the reason for that is obvious. Inside walls often is structural, and it carries some of the weight of the roof. It have fire benefits. So removing any wall, enlarging openings extensively, enclosing things like patios that will affect ventilation, all of those things need building plans and can be problematic if it's not done, especially as far as load-bearing walls is concerned. We dealt with a property in a complex where inside, well, a wall that was removed that at some stage was an outside wall, but then became an inside wall. And it didn't happen immediately, but after a while, you just wait for the right wind, the storm, and the roof just collapsed. So not knowing that there's approved plans and certificates of occupancy, you can be dealing and offering a product to a buyer that is not safe. And therefore, it is important to make sure that you offer a safe product to your buyer. Okay, I think we have reached about the end. The good news is there was a poll on would you like to attend more training, and like 97% of people indicate that. Wow, that is very positive. So you can send Wimpy subjects, and we will, if it's in our field of expertise, we will gladly assist you with it. We do training sessions from time to time with various agencies. So yeah, you're welcome to get hold of us as well if you have any more questions. This was only touching the basics of the responsibilities of a property practitioner, and we'll gladly assist you with any queries or questions on any of these. Wimpy, from your side, just...
Yes. Aubrey, thank you very much. You've covered quite a lot. I think what is important is that you touched on a subject about the professionalism we all have to adhere to. Enrique and myself, we're always open for questions from our from our clients. You also touch on the subject of completing offer to purchases. It's become more and more important to be correct. Clients is more knowledgeable these days. It is not like the past. I always joke when I started practicing, I would see clients, they would change the mortgage loan agreements by hand, initial, and we send it back at a banquet. I don't know why, accept it. Obviously, it wasn't big changes, but that's just an example how much our far the industry has come. There's a very big responsibility on all the agents as well as ourselves to deliver professional service. For me, professional service is to be knowledgeable, as you said, and also our work never stops. You don't stop when the clock says 5. We have to, we control people's lives. So we're happy you guys joined. Please send through your requests. I am going to set up another meeting with Aubrey, but the specific topics like building plans where you look into service checks or sectional title plans, not to cover it as a whole, but maybe more specialized areas. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you everybody, and I hope you found it helpful, and we're looking forward to hearing from you if there's any questions or we can support you in any of those areas. Thank you very much.